Sarah never imagined her life would unravel so quickly. One day, she was happily married to Ethan, the man she trusted above all else. And the next, she was forced to flee with a secret so dangerous that it could destroy everything she thought she knew about him. Ethan, her husband, had thrown her out, and now as the walls closed in on both their lives, Sarah realized the truth. The man she loved was hiding a deadly secret, and the consequences would haunt them both forever. Sarah Mitchell's life seemed like a fairy tale. She was 32, married to Ethan Mitchell, a charismatic and successful entrepreneur. They lived in a large modern home on the outskirts of a peaceful suburban neighborhood, surrounded by manicured lawns and quiet streets. Sarah had always dreamed of a family like this, and now, her dream was coming true. She was pregnant with their first child, a son. The pregnancy had been a joyful surprise, something both she and Ethan had wanted, and their happiness was shared by everyone who knew them. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Ethan was known in their social circle for his charm, his success, and his generous spirit. He was always the life of the party, and Sarah was the picture of grace, often posting photos of their idyllic life on social media for friends and family to admire. The couple's pregnancy announcement had been met with an outpouring of congratulations. Their friends described them as the perfect couple, and many envied the life they had built together. But as Sarah's pregnancy progressed, subtle cracks began to appear in the veneer of their perfect life. Ethan, once the doting husband, started to withdraw. It wasn't immediately noticeable, but Sarah began to feel it. He became distant, spending more and more time at the office or on business trips. When he was home, he was often tired, irritable, and preoccupied with thoughts Sarah couldn't reach. Their conversations grew shorter, their moments together less frequent. He was no longer the warm, affectionate man she had married. At first, Sarah chalked it up to stress. Ethan's business, which had been thriving, had started showing signs of struggle. His company, a tech startup that had once been the talk of the town, was facing some challenges, but Sarah never thought too much of it. She had always believed in Ethan's ability to bounce back from setbacks. They had been through tough times before, and they had always come out stronger on the other side. However, Ethan's mood swings became harder to ignore. One moment he would be calm and collected, and the next he would snap over the smallest things. Sarah found herself walking on eggshells around him, afraid to say or do anything that might trigger one of his outbursts. She had never seen him like this before. The man she had fallen in love with seemed to be disappearing before her eyes, replaced by someone who was increasingly difficult to understand. Despite all this, Sarah remained hopeful. She told herself that it was just the stress of the pregnancy and the challenges at work weighing on Ethan. After all, they were about to become parents. Surely things would get better once their baby arrived. She made plans for the nursery, picked out baby clothes, and envisioned the future she had always dreamed of. But in the back of her mind, a nagging feeling lingered. Something wasn't right. She couldn't pinpoint it, but the distance between them felt unbridgeable. It wasn't until she saw a change in Ethan's behavior that Sarah realized how much things had shifted. He became increasingly evasive, shutting her out emotionally. The affectionate gestures, the love notes, the tender words, everything that had once defined their relationship, seemed to evaporate. And in its place was an unspoken tension that left Sarah questioning everything about their marriage. She tried to talk to him, to understand what was happening, but Ethan remained silent, distant, and unresponsive. Little did Sarah know, the worst was yet to come. Weeks passed, and Sarah's unease only deepened. Ethan's behavior had become increasingly erratic, and she felt more and more like a stranger in her own home. She had tried everything she could think of to bring back the connection they once shared, making his favorite meals, planning quiet nights together. and even suggesting a weekend getaway to rekindle their bond. But nothing worked. Ethan had become a shell of the man she had married, and his indifference was suffocating. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where they barely exchanged a word, Sarah decided to confront him. Her heart raced as she steeled herself for what might come. She had never been one to shy away from difficult conversations, but something told her that this would be different. As she walked into the living room, Ethan was sitting on the couch staring at the TV with a distant expression, his mind clearly elsewhere. She sat down beside him, searching for the right words. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said softly, her voice tinged with worry. He didn't immediately respond, and Sarah could feel the silence stretching between them, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes cold, as if he were looking right through her. "What about?" he muttered, his voice flat and emotionless. It was as if the man she had once known was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Something's wrong, Ethan, I can feel it. You've been shutting me out. The way you're acting, it's like you don't even care about me anymore. About us." Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. He looked away, visibly irritated. "Sarah, I'm just tired. I'm dealing with a lot right now," he replied, his voice sharp. She frowned, sensing that there was more he wasn't telling her. "What do you mean? What's going on? We're supposed to be in this together." For a moment, Ethan seemed to hesitate, his gaze flickering with something that almost resembled guilt. But just as quickly, it disappeared, replaced by anger. "You wouldn't understand," he snapped. "I don't need this right now. I don't need you piling more pressure on me." The words hit Sarah like a slap in the face. She had never seen him so defensive, so cold. She felt a lump form in her throat, fighting back tears as she tried to make sense of it all. "You're pushing me away, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "We're supposed to be a team. We're about to have a baby, and you're shutting me out. I don't know what's happening, but I can't keep doing this." Ethan stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "I don't have time for this right now," he muttered, pacing the room. "I need space." The words stung, but Sarah couldn't argue. She had seen the signs for weeks, and now it felt like the dam had finally burst. Without another word, Ethan grabbed his coat and walked out the door, leaving Sarah standing in the empty room, her heart shattered. In the days that followed, Sarah felt like she was drowning in confusion. She tried calling Ethan, sending him texts, but there was no response. He had disappeared. He didn't return her calls, and the few messages she managed to send went unanswered. It was as if he had completely shut her out of his life. When he finally came back, it wasn't with an apology or an explanation. Instead, it was worse. Ethan came to Sarah with a request that left her stunned. "I want you to leave," he said flatly, his tone cold and final. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was hearing. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline of what she assumed was a cruel joke. But Ethan's face was stone, and there was no trace of humor in his eyes. "I can't do this anymore," he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "I need space, and you need to go." The world around Sarah seemed to collapse in on itself. She felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. How had it come to this? They had been building a life together, and now she was being told to leave the man she loved, her husband, the father of her unborn child. "But, Ethan, I'm pregnant," Sarah managed to say, her voice shaking. "What about the baby?" He didn't flinch. "I don't care," he replied. "You need to leave. Now." The finality of his words hit her harder than any physical blow. He was telling her to leave, to pack her things and go. In a daze, Sarah gathered a few of her belongings, trying to keep herself together. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a prison. She had no idea where to go, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life, as she had known it, was over. As she walked out the door, Sarah's heart ached with a mixture of disbelief and devastation. She had loved this man, trusted him with everything she had. And now she was alone, cast aside like she meant nothing. Little did she know, the journey ahead would bring a shocking twist that would turn everything she thought she knew about her marriage and her husband upside down. Weeks went by, and Sarah found herself struggling to adjust to her new reality. The life she had once known felt like it belonged to someone else, and she wasn't sure how to move forward. She had left Ethan's house, but she hadn't gone far. Sarah moved in with her sister Laura, who lived in a modest apartment just a few miles away. Laura was supportive, though she could tell that Sarah was barely holding it together. She spent her days staring out the window, her thoughts consumed with what had happened to her marriage and her nights tossing and turning in the unfamiliar bed. At first she tried to keep her distance from Ethan. His silence was unbearable and the way he had cast her aside still stung. But as the weeks wore on, Sarah found herself spiraling deeper into confusion. She hadn't heard from him at all, except for the few text messages asking for updates on the baby. Ethan's sudden coldness was unnerving, and the lack of answers only fueled her desperation to understand what had gone wrong. One night Sarah sat down at her computer and began researching. She looked up every bit of information she could find about Ethan's business, searching for clues about what might be causing his strange behavior. It wasn't that she thought he was hiding anything, at least not at first, but something had felt off for months and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. As Sarah dug deeper into articles, company press releases, and financial records, a chilling realization began to settle in. Ethan's business, which had once seemed invincible, was beginning to show signs of struggle. The articles she found spoke of a company in crisis, facing mounting debts and questions about its leadership. She couldn't understand why Ethan hadn't been open with her about it, why he hadn't confided in her. After all, they were supposed to be partners in everything. But the more she read, the more the pieces started to come together. There was more than just business failure here. She came across rumors that hinted at shady financial dealings, whispers of mismanagement, and even fraud. It didn't make sense at first. Ethan had always been careful with money, always so precise in his professional life. Yet the deeper she looked, the more it seemed like there was a hidden side to Ethan that she had never known. Despite the mounting evidence, Sarah couldn't bring herself to confront him directly. What if she was wrong? What if she had misunderstood? But there was one thing she knew for sure. Ethan wasn't the man she thought he was, and his world was unraveling in a way she couldn't yet comprehend. It wasn't until a week later that Sarah received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. She needed to meet with a private investigator. The investigator had been hired by someone close to Ethan and had information that would change everything. Sarah hesitated at first, unsure of what she was getting into. But her gut told her that this was the next step she had to take. She agreed to meet. The meeting took place in a dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. The investigator was a tall, middle-aged man named James, with sharp features and an air of quiet professionalism. He wasted no time. Without preamble, he slid a folder across the table to Sarah. Inside were pages of financial statements, emails, and records that spoke of questionable transactions, secret accounts, and even suspicious transfers of money. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize that Ethan had been living a lie for years. His business wasn't failing by accident. It had been carefully constructed to hide illicit activities. money laundering, fraudulent investments, and partnerships with people who had ties to criminal organizations. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the documents. She couldn't breathe, couldn't understand what she was seeing. The man she had married, the man who had promised her a future, was not the man she thought he was. James didn't mince words. Your husband has been involved in illegal dealings for years. I've traced some of his associates back to criminal organizations. And there's more. He's been laundering money through his business, making deals with people who have a very dark reputation. Sarah felt as if the floor had been pulled out from under her. She had always trusted Ethan, believed in him with every part of her heart. But now, it was all a lie. This man, the man she had given everything to, had built his life on deception and betrayal. "Why are you telling me all this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James hesitated before responding. "Because, from what I can gather, he's been hiding more than just financial trouble. There are people involved who will stop at nothing to protect their interests. And you, Sarah, are in danger." The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. Danger? She wasn't sure what to make of it, but one thing was clear. Ethan's world was not just unraveling. It was collapsing, and she was caught in the middle of it. What had started as a quest for answers had just turned into a fight for survival. The information Sarah had received from the private investigator had shaken her to her core. Every page she'd turned in that folder revealed more layers of betrayal and deceit. Ethan's world, the one she had thought she knew so well, was a house of cards, built on lies, manipulation, and criminal activities. And now she was not just an innocent bystander. She was entangled in something far darker than she could have imagined. After her meeting with James, Sarah didn't know what to do. She had always trusted Ethan, believed in his good intentions, even when his behavior had started to change. But the truth was undeniable. He had been hiding something far more dangerous than a few financial missteps. It wasn't just about money. Ethan had been playing a dangerous game with people who had no moral compass. And she was caught in the middle. She spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and disbelief, unable to comprehend what was happening. She tried to go about her daily routine, keeping herself busy, but her mind constantly returned to the terrifying revelations about Ethan's business dealings. She had always believed that they were partners, a team, facing the future together. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had kept her in the dark on purpose. Perhaps to protect her, but more likely to keep her from discovering the truth until it was too late. But there was one piece of information she couldn't ignore. James had mentioned that Ethan's dealings weren't just about money. They were connected to people who had dangerous ties, and those people wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect their interests. Sarah had a sinking feeling that the walls were closing in around her, and if she didn't act soon, she might find herself facing consequences she couldn't escape. The next time Ethan reached out to her, Sarah was prepared. He had texted her, asking if they could meet. She was hesitant at first, but knew she couldn't avoid him forever. What was once a peaceful life had now turned into a dangerous game of cat and mouse, and Sarah needed answers. She agreed to meet him at a cafe, the same place they'd gone to countless times in happier days. When she arrived, Ethan was already seated at a corner table, looking as though nothing had changed. His appearance was the same, sharp, well-groomed, confident, but Sarah noticed the tension in his posture. His eyes darted nervously, and he avoided looking at her directly. It was as if he knew something was coming, but didn't want to face it. "Sarah," he said, his voice flat. "I've been thinking about everything. We need to talk." She took a seat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I don't know what to say, Ethan. What's going on? I found out some things about your business and about you." Ethan's eyes flickered, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw a flash of fear. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a hardened, defensive expression. Look, Sarah, I know this looks bad, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. But you don't understand. I did what I had to do. I was trying to protect you, trying to protect us. The business. It got complicated, and I made some decisions that I thought were for the best. I didn't want you involved in any of this. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard this before, the excuses, the half-truths. But now they didn't hold the same weight. Ethan leaned forward, his face contorting with frustration. I didn't want you to get hurt. Everything has gotten out of hand. I didn't want to drag you into it. You don't know what I've been dealing with, the people I've had to work with to keep this company afloat. Sarah's mind raced and she could feel the anger bubbling inside her. You were dealing with criminals, Ethan. You were hiding money, laundering it through your business, and I had no idea. Do you even know what you've done? You've made deals with people who hurt others, and now they're coming for us. Ethan froze. His mouth opened slightly as if he were about to respond, but no words came out. For a long moment, the tension between them felt unbearable. She wasn't sure if he was genuinely remorseful or just trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. All she knew was that her trust in him had shattered, and the man sitting across from her was no longer the husband she had once known. You need to fix it, Ethan, she said, her voice resolute. But I won't be a part of your lies anymore. I'm done. With those words, Sarah stood up and walked away, her heart heavy but her mind clear. She had confronted the truth, and now she had to protect herself and her child at all costs. What Ethan had built had crumbled, and there was nothing left to salvage. As she stepped out into the cold night, Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. The real fight was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of frantic decisions, sleepless nights, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. Sarah had left Ethan, but her life was far from uncomplicated. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she stepped outside, she felt eyes on her. The weight of the private investigator's warning haunted her. There were dangerous people involved, and Sarah was in the crosshairs. She had never imagined her life would spiral into this kind of chaos. But now, there was no going back. Sarah had made a decision to protect herself and her unborn child, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She reached out to James, the investigator, asking for help. He was a man of few words, but he had a way of making things happen. They met again, this time in a nondescript hotel room, where James briefed her on the next steps. He didn't sugarcoat anything. You're in deeper than you realize, James said, his tone grim. Ethan's business partners, the ones he's been working with, these people don't take kindly to being crossed. I've seen what they do to people who get in their way, and trust me, you don't want to be on their radar. Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. The reality of her situation had only just begun to sink in. She had thought the worst of it was Ethan's betrayal, his lies, but now she understood how much more was at stake. It wasn't just about a failing marriage or deceitful business practices. It was about her life, and the life of her child. James gave her a contact, someone who could help her disappear if things escalated. It was a dangerous move, but Sarah was willing to do whatever it took to protect herself. The plan was simple. Get out of town, cut ties with everything that had once been familiar, and start fresh somewhere else. There was no telling how long Ethan's connections would come after her, but it was the only way she could ensure her safety. As she prepared to leave, Sarah thought about the people who would be left behind. Her sister, Laura, was the only one who knew the full extent of the situation, but she hadn't fully understood just how serious things had gotten. She tried to explain, tried to make Laura see that this wasn't just about a failing relationship, but it was hard. No one could truly understand the danger unless they had seen it firsthand. Even Laura, who loved her and wanted to protect her, could never grasp the level of desperation Sarah felt. The night before she planned to leave, Sarah sat in her temporary apartment, looking at the walls that had once felt like a safe haven. Now they were just barriers between her and the unknown. The life she had known was slipping away, piece by piece. She stared at the phone in her hand, contemplating whether she should call Ethan. She hadn't spoken to him since their last confrontation, and part of her wanted to ask him why. Why had he done this? Why had he dragged her into his world of crime, of betrayal? But she knew that whatever explanation he might offer would be hollow. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. There was nothing left to say. The next morning she packed what little she had left and made arrangements to meet James. He would help her with the first leg of her journey, far from the life she had once shared with Ethan. As Sarah walked out of the door, leaving behind everything that had once been hers, she couldn't shake the thought that she was leaving her old self behind as well. She was no longer the woman who had fallen in love with Ethan, the woman who had believed in their future. That version of her was gone, along with all the dreams she had built around their life together. James met her in a quiet parking lot, a nondescript car waiting for her. There was no turning back now. As she slipped into the passenger seat, she realized just how much had changed in such a short amount of time. She had been living a lie, trusting a man who had deceived her in the worst way possible. But now she was taking control of her own story. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months Sarah felt a flicker of hope. As they drove away from the city that had once been her home, she thought about her baby, the life she was about to bring into the world, and the future that was still waiting for her. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. But as the city skyline faded into the distance, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She was done with the past. She was moving forward, ready to build a new life, even if it meant starting from nothing. In the end, it wasn't just about escaping the dangers Ethan had brought into her life. It was about reclaiming her sense of self, her dignity, and her future. And as the car sped away into the unknown, Sarah realized that sometimes the hardest part of surviving isn't escaping the danger. It's finding the strength to keep going when everything you thought you knew is shattered. She was finally ready to rebuild, no matter the cost.